Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com, as well as the mobile app. So glad you could tune in. And multiple ways you can interact with us here on the program. Give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also hit us up on Twitter, hashtag GiantsChat. A reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. And Big Blue Kickoff Live is brought to you by Pepsi Zero Sugar, new and improved. Zero never tasted so good. He is Jonathan Casillas. I'm Lance Medow, with you here for the next 60 minutes as we'll get into what is pretty much a busy time, Jonathan. Even though the season's over, you got the Senior Bowl, you got the Pro Bowl coming up this weekend, then we're going to shift gears to the Super Bowl. It never ends, and you could attest to that being on and off the field.
Oh, yeah, of course. But for players, the players are off.
Yes.
The players are done.
That's one facet.
There's only two teams right now that are working,
Sure.
talking about their players. And everybody else is relaxing, taking vacations. Some guys are getting ready for the Pro Bowl and the Pro Bowl games and stuff like that. A couple of guys from the Giants are getting ready for the Pro Bowl. I'm excited about that, to see what type of activities that they got in the Pro Bowl. But this is Joe Schoen time. This is management time right here, coaching time. This is people think the coaches get a lot of time off. They don't. The coaches are working 24/7 right now for prospects, for individual guys that's on a team right now that are up, and then also potential other guys throughout the league that could be possible Giants next year, and then also the guys that are seniors and juniors that are eligible for the draft this year. So it's definitely a busy time. I remember my senior year in college. This was a very anxious time for me, coming out as a young kid, because you don't know your future. You don't know where you're going to go.
Sure.
You don't know if, I had a Senior Bowl invite, but I was hurt, and there's a lot of things that go into it. But as an NFL player, this is the time to relax and chill, and then, and then the only thing you're really worried about is watching a Super Bowl game. Where am I going to watch a Super Bowl game at as a player? That's the only thing you're really worried about right now.
Except, of course, if you're a member of the Eagles or the Chiefs,
Right.
They actually have slightly more important business to take care of. And we'll get into that, as well as Jonathan's points about what scouts are looking for around this time of the year. But speaking of the Senior Bowl, our very own John Schmelk is in Mobile covering those events, and we bring him on the line right off the top of the show here. John, how's everything on your neck of the woods and your end?
We're doing good. I am ready to break down the Pro Bowl balloon toss.
Well, that is going to be some enticing.
Okay.
You didn't hear about the balloon toss? You're not amped up about that?
I don't know what that is. What is that?
Well, they're having an overall competition amongst the players where there's points that are allotted for different competitions. This is the new wave of the Pro Bowl.
Okay, I didn't know anything about that.
You got to catch up on these.
Yeah,
times
I do.
Jonathan.
Yeah, you're right about that.
We're going to expect a full breakdown from you later.
Okay,
on in the
I'll
program.
check it out.
Yeah.
Check it out. I haven't been on my game today.
Well, before we get into that, John, let's start with Joe Schoen spoke to the media yesterday, and I know he was asked about Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones, and not that he gave away any state secrets, but it seems as if Barkley, the talks are underway. Daniel Jones, it's more of a wait-and-see approach, seemed to be the major takeaway from that.
Yeah, I think he had talked about previously how they had, Saquon mentioned how they had spoken earlier in the year around the trade deadline too. So, yeah, I think they've had those conversations, and we'll see if they can work it out. I think, that's a tough nut to crack, but Saquon had a great year, and they'll have to try to figure it out and what works within the Giants' salary structure and then what works for Saquon. And, I think Saquon wants to be back. I think the Giants respect him as a player. They think he's really helped them win games this year. They would want him back, but can they make the math work from a business perspective? And then Daniel Jones, according to Joe Schoen, they haven't started that process yet. And again, I think that's a tough one too, because the starting quarterbacks in the NFL get paid, and the question is how much. And that's going to be a tough negotiation too. The Giants only have one franchise tag to divvy out. I'm sure they prefer not to have to use the franchise tag at all if they could avoid it, because then you can spread that money out around a little bit more creatively instead of having all that money going into 1 year. So those are things they'll try to figure out. But I think definitely, even though I'm in Mobile here, watching prospects, I think, most Giant fans are rightfully and understandably so thinking about free agency more so than the draft right now.
Does that mean anything that they're more in talk with Saquon instead of Daniel Jones? What does that mean? Does that mean anything, Lance? Schmelke? Does that mean anything that they're more in talks with Saquon even during the season, and then talks with a guy that we know is going to be here? Because I don't know if we know if Saquon's going to be here. Is that an indication of that?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just a matter of the fact that, Saquon, the talks, did go on during the season a little bit. And look, Daniel's number is just going to be much higher, and it's a much bigger contract. I think it can look very different based on how you want to do it. I could see it being a short-term deal. I could see it being a long-term deal, depending on how Daniel wants it structured, how the Giants want it structured. I think there are different ways to do it. And I just think that is, just a much bigger process. And I think they'll wait for the right time to start that this offseason. But I'm sure they'd like to get it done if they can before you get to that period, which I believe happens maybe the last week of February, Lance, or maybe the first week of March, where teams can start putting those franchise tags on players. And they'd like to try to have as much as it's done before then as possible, so they can use that tag appropriately if they have to.
Well, and also I think from Joe Schoen's perspective, it makes sense if you could have Daniel Jones on the books, since that number is larger, as you pointed out. You have much more flexibility and a better idea of how you can operate with the rest of your finances entering free agency. If you have him locked in, whether it be at the tag or whether it be on a short-term deal. Not to say that Saquon, having him locked in, doesn't help you, but I think Daniel Jones is far more critical because we could be talking about in that $30 million territory, much more so than Saquon.
Yeah, or more, depending on, what Daniel and his agents want. So, yeah, 100%. I just think that the size of that number and just, the impact of the quarterback position and whether or not you have somebody there and how you're going to operate, I think all that is impacted much more by the Daniel thing than the Saquon thing. So, for me, and again, that's just the nature of the business and of the sport of the position. So, yes, I think they will try to get that done as soon as they can, but I don't think it's going to be easy. Whenever you're dealing with those big numbers in the quarterback position, go back to, and I'm not saying it's going to go this way, but look what happened when Kirk Cousins, was with Washington and they couldn't figure it out. He ended up doing multiple one-year deals with Minnesota, and then he got the multi-year. So there are a lot of different ways this can go, and I think once they start those negotiations, we'll have a better idea of how they're going to turn out.
Now you have Lamar Jackson, Jimmy G, Geno Smith, Mike White, Cooper Rush, Taylor Heineke. I guess the upper tier would be Lamar Jackson, of course. Jimmy, you could kind of probably fit him up there because of his experience and his longevity in the NFL. Now let's say Lamar Jackson gets signed right away in terms of free agency, that March 15 date. Does that set the bar? Is that something that'll be good for Daniel Jones, you think?
Yeah, I don't know how what the comparison is. Jones doesn't have the pelts on the wall like Lamar Jackson does, but I think whenever you have a quarterback sign for more money, that helps you. And I think we could have a Joe Burrow extension coming here too, JC. I think we can have a Justin Herbert extension coming too as well.
Right.
So I think those are things too that I'm sure his agents will try to use. But again, I think if you're the Giants, you say, well, Joe Burrow's made it to a Super Bowl. Look at his numbers. Daniel hasn't been there yet. Done those things yet. So I think all that is part of the negotiation. And you mentioned the quarterback market. Don't forget the two guys that could be traded this offseason. Derek Carr from the Raiders is a guy that if he's not traded, he can be let go, and he might be on the free agent market, right? Who knows what kind of money he's going to get? He's due over $40 million this year. And then, who knows what's going to happen with the Aaron Rodgers saga. So, there are a lot of quarterbacks being juggled this offseason, and with recent retirements, Tom Brady again, go back to Drew Brees, Matt Ryan's on his way out, Eli and all that stuff, there are just not a lot of quarterbacks available that you would have confidence in starting. So I think it is a bit of a player's market in that regard because there are going to be so many open spots at the quarterback position this offseason for these guys to choose from.
Well, and that's more of a reason why I think the Giants need to think about that if Daniel Jones does receive interest elsewhere, or maybe they want to give him the transition tag. We've talked about this on the show, and they say, hey, go out, see what the market has to offer, and then we always have the opportunity to match. That could be also another approach with respect to the Giants, depending on what plays out the next few weeks. I know Joe Schoen touched on a number of other things, and one of the interesting things, at least from his lens, is, John, at this time last year, right, they went through the process of bringing in Brian Daboll. Coaches are getting used to one another. Brian Daboll's trying to orchestrate his staff. Joe Schoen's learning the ins and outs of the scouting department. Now you move the calendar forward. I mean, they're in a completely different situation this year in terms of familiarity, the process. It's not to say that they weren't organized last year, but it really is night and day what Joe Schoen and company are going through with respect to the Senior Bowl compared to where they were at this time last year.
Oh, my God. Joe Schoen had just been hired, Lance. I mean, we were out here with Joe Schoen at the Senior Bowl. He didn't have – all he had was the staff left from when Dave Gettleman was here. He hadn't hired anyone else yet, and he didn't have a coach. I mean, the coaching search had just started. Like, it wasn't even, like well into the coaching search. Like, it had barely begun at that point. So – Yeah, I mean, they're way far ahead. They've had their staff, evaluating these people the way Joe Schoen wants them evaluated during the fall. So he has all those reports. Dennis Hickey's done a good job kind of stepping in there as the, director of college scouting. So they're pretty happy, I think, with where they are, and they certainly are much further ahead than where they were at this point last year for sure.
And I think they have a great idea, Joe Schoen and the staff of the New York Giants. They have a great idea of what they have in this building, and they establish culture. They understand the guys that they have in the building that basically followed their culture and the guys that all brought in. That's what they had questions of the year before. That's why I felt like they didn't pick up Daniel Jones' fifth-year option, because there was a lot of questions on him and basically everybody on the roster. There was questions about Saquon's health. A lot of questions got answered this year, which was huge.
Yeah.
And I think they're in a lot better position as in management than going into this free agency period and this offseason than they were last year. And I think that looms well for the future for the New York Giants.
No, 100%, Jonathan. And look, they have, and I'm sure if Joe Schoen, by the way, could go back in the time machine and pick up Daniel Jones' fifth-year option, he would. Unfortunately, that technology does not exist at the current time. But you know what? I thought it was the right move last year. We talked about it on the show a bunch, Lance, where it was prudent for them not to pick up that fifth-year option. But now, after this year, you wish you had. That's what happens. But yeah, look, and guys and bringing guys in from the outside too, because that's an unknown situation. You don't know exactly what these guys are. You know what Saquon is. You know what Daniel is. They've been in the building. You know what Julian Love is. Next couple of years, you know what Dexter is. You know what Andrew Thomas is. You know what Xavier McKinney is. You feel good about bringing those guys back. You have no doubts there. Once you start going outside the organization, there are a lot of unknowns pop up, and you don't exactly know what you're going to be getting.
Well, and that goes back to when Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll spoke at the end of the season. He used the term, John, known commodities, and the fact that it's a little bit easier to roll the dice with players currently on your roster because you're just operating with more intel, which leads you to believe that they probably want to build upon what they already have in-house. Not to say that they're not going to look outside the organization, but there's a big pro, him being around this building, interacting with Daniel Jones, interacting with Dexter Lawrence, Saquon, seeing these guys up close and personal as opposed to hearing through the grapevine how they operate and so forth. Before we let you go, John, one other thing that obviously I wanted to bring up, there's, I know, a change in terms of Jim Nagy, in terms of the structure of interviews this year with respect to the formal ones and the informal ones. And I know tonight is going to be another, I believe, set of interviews between scouts and teams with prospects. That was the first thing I wanted to bring up. And the second thing is they're going to have another 90-minute practice session today. And who at all do you think perhaps stood out or is improving their stock down in Mobile?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they have formal and informal interviews here at the Senior Bowl. As somebody's car alarm right next to us has decided to start going off, I apologize for that. But yeah, they have formal and informals here. The formals took place, I believe, on Monday night, and the second set of them is tonight, where they kind of bring guys in. They give certain players to coaches to talk to, other guys they have scouts talk to, and they kind of run it down that way. And those have been ongoing. In terms of players, look, I think we've had some guys on the offensive line play well, especially on the interior, like Osiris Torrance has been very good. Steve Avila from TCU's been good. I've been happy with those guys. Couple, Jaden Reed, wide receiver from Michigan State's been good. Xavier Hutchinson's been solid. I think he's done a nice job over the course of practice. So, yeah, there have been a number of guys that have shown out, and I'll be back, flying back tonight. So I'll be on with Howard tomorrow, and I'll give a really full recap of exactly what guys have kind of done well here at Senior Bowl.
Sounds good. He is our very own John Schmelk down in Mobile covering the Senior Bowl. Enjoy the final days of the festivities and safe travels back to East Rutherford, New Jersey.
Thank you guys. See you tomorrow.
You got it. Schmelk. Sounds good. So that's the latest from the Senior Bowl. And I want to piggyback off of some of the things we discussed with John before we open up the phone lines at 201-939-4513. And that is some of the comments that Joe Schoen mentioned. And I think you brought up an interesting question, Jonathan. Should we read too much into Joe Schoen saying that conversations are underway with Saquon as opposed to Daniel Jones? And I would echo the sentiments that John mentioned. I think that it's a little bit more complex with the quarterback, more so than the running back. And, Saquon even mentioned, if you recall, when he was in the locker room before they met with the media and parted ways for at least the offseason, that he's realistic. in terms of what the market's going to be. He understands. He's dealt with his fair share of injuries. He understands that the market value of running backs has drastically changed with teams turning to the draft more often than not. So perhaps that's another reason why it may be a little bit easier. And this is just my own personal opinion, not to say that I have any intel of maybe why things have already gotten underway with him as opposed to Daniel Jones.
Yeah, and look, I know Saquon. You know, I got a personal relationship with him. I think he's a very confident young man. And there's nothing that in me that believes he doesn't think he's the best running back in the league.
Well, if he didn't, I'd say there's a problem, right? I mean, you want to have that confidence.
You know, and that number for, I guess, McCaffrey is $16 million. So if they haven't had an agreement yet in the Giants to Saquon, I mean, that's probably the number that he's looking at. And I'm pretty sure the Giants aren't coming nowhere close to that. You know, so I guess that's why it's probably taken so long. And look, I hope they figure this thing out because I think we all want Saquon to be a New York Giant, if not only in the immediate future, but forever. You know, him retire as a Giant. And hopefully that he stays healthy, knock on wood, you know, because he's one of the best backs in the league. Like I said, if not the best back in the league, I think he's that talented. I think he's that good. I look at this coaching staff. I look at Dayball. I look at Wink. I look at Kafka. I look at all the position coaches. I feel like they did a good job, in not only with Joe Schoen bringing in guys, but also developing guys. Sure. And I feel like you don't really see that a lot at this level. You know, there's not a lot of technique taught in the NFL. It's just really not. You know, they don't spend
no
too
time
much.
for it, really,
right? They don't spend
right?
too much time on it because it's game planning basically every single week. X's and O's, teaching the defense, running over the plays and running over the nuances and different things that requires in the offense and defense. And it's just not too much technique taught. I feel like this year we watched guys develop in front of our eyes. Daniel Jones got tremendously better this year. You know, and I think we saw that from day one when, you know, Dayball kind of snapped on him against Tennessee. And he checked him right away. And, man, we didn't really see a lot of mistakes from Daniel Jones throughout the year. And you can even say when they brought in Isaiah Hodgins, he was a relatively unknown guy, practice squad up in Buffalo. He ended up being a really good player for the New York Giants. Richie James, I feel like he's improved this year. And you can go out, Cordell Flott. A lot of the younger guys developed this year and got better. Dexter Lawrence took a huge jump this year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's been pretty good. He was dynamic this year. You know, so I have the utmost confidence in not only Shane that they're going to bring in the right guys that fit their culture and what they want to do here, but they're going to be able to develop some guys that are young, maybe guys that are playing in the Senior Bowl right now that's going to be on this roster in a few months, you know, and because they got a lot of time with them now. Now they know exactly kind of what their culture really is because at the end of the day, Dayball was in different places, right? He was working with different men. Now he's working with these coaches and these players. That's a single identity and different from anything that he's done before. Like you don't bring over exactly what you've done before, especially because he's never been a head coach. So this is new for him. This is a new thing for him. This culture that he built last year with Shane and all the coaches and all the players in this building, this is a new identity, but now they know what it is. It was a big question before. Now they know the guys, at least they have a better idea of who fits into the culture that they established last year.
Well, to your point, the foundation has been established,
yes.
right? Both within the coaching staff as well as within the front office. That's why we were talking about it's really so much different than where they were at this point last year because there's that organization, there's that comfort level. And as far as your point about developing players, completely with you, and I think that needs to continue moving forward. You need to continue to tap into the skill set of the various draft classes, not just the most recent one. But I think also it's a product, Jonathan, of getting those young guys on the field this past season, right? You've been on teams that are made up of veterans, and it's hard for, even a second-round pick maybe coming in to see the field other than special teams. Unfortunately, due to injuries, they were maybe forced into accelerating that. But when you look at the snap count breakdown for this season, what you see is those guys got a taste of the field, meaningful snaps. And that, to me, is extremely beneficial moving forward because now you're not coming into the spring saying, I wonder what we have in Cordell Flott. And I'm using him as an example because you brought him in, right? Sometimes you go into year two, the rookie class or some members don't play that much. So the following spring, it's still the evaluation period.
Yeah.
I think you're a little bit ahead of the curve as a result of these guys seeing more field time this year.
The guys that were healthy.
Sure.
Because that list of unhealthy guys might be longer than the list of healthy younger guys on the team. And I think that's something that the Giants have to address this year. Maybe it's something that they're doing in sports and nutrition over here. I don't know. Maybe it's the turf. I don't know, but they got to get those numbers down in terms of injuries and guys that were on IR. I would think is one of the highest in the league, especially for the younger players. And then you throw Sterling Shepard in there, a couple older veteran guys that basically missed a good amount of the season. So not only I think you got to keep these guys healthy, but also you got to add depth, and that's something that I talked about last week's show and also on Tuesday with Paul Dottino, is that the Giants need depth, in every position. And the great thing about having, it's good and bad about everything, but I say the good thing about, taking from the injuries that they had last year, it was a lot of young guys that got valuable experience in crucial games throughout the year. It wasn't like in pickup time or end of the game, blowout
when
time.
It's a lopsided
this was
game
like
or something
a lot of young guys were starting games, playing as a third nickel, third corner, coming in really early, playing a significant amount on special teams throughout the year. And not only do you have confidence in the player, the player has confidence in himself, but the coaches have now confidence in that player, that maybe that he's not a starter, but he's a backup. Backups are so important in the NFL because, number one, backups, a lot of skill positions in the medium skill positions or the big skill positions, which are like linebacker, tight end, safeties, those positions like that, play special teams. And the Giants have not been good on special teams, especially this past year. That's where depth comes in at. You need quality backups that only play special teams, but if something happens to your starter, that they could come in and you don't miss a step.
Because as Thomas McGahee has always talked about, I like to bring this up, he refers to special teams as the gumbo.
Yep.
And every year he's making a new gumbo, or I should say every week he's making a new gumbo, right?
Every week, especially with the how the injuries were going this year.
Yep.
This guy up, Xavier McKinney missing time, this safety down, this guy up, and that's the difficult task of being a special teams coach in the NFL, because you literally don't know what you're working with.
You don't know who's up
until
who's down.
basically game day, because I don't know if everyone knows this. I'm sure we got a lot of callers that know a lot about football, but there's only 46 guys active for a game. There's 53 active players, but only 46 guys play. And that number might be a little less than that given the injuries. So there's not 53 guys available for game time. And those numbers switch. That last 45th, and 46th guy on the roster, that changes week to week. When I first started playing my first game, I was like the 46th guy. But before that, I was number 53 for the first two games. I was inactive. I was a healthy scratch, but I was young.
Yeah.
And we had 7 or 8 linebackers when I was in New Orleans. And then one of them went down. All of a sudden, I get elevated to the 46th guy. But I was right on that bubble, right on that bubble. And it depended basically how I did on special teams, because, yes, I was a suitable backup, but they didn't trust me yet to play defense yet. I was young. I was undrafted. I was coming off an injury. I knew the playbook, but knowing the playbook in the meeting room is different than going out there on the field.
Yep.
So you got to build that trust, and that's a lot of times it's done through special teams, especially with the lower draft picks, guys like myself who was undrafted, or even high draft picks that may not get the defense as smoothly as they would want them to, or offense as well. They play special teams and kind of earn that trust through special teams, and then all of a sudden they end up playing at the end of the year.
Well, because once they see that you're reliable, they can all of a sudden increase your usage across the board. And I'm sure there were situations where you said the linebacker was hurt 1 week ahead of you, but then the following week they had injuries to the wide receiver position, and they're going to look elsewhere.
Yep. And that's the thing.
46.
That's the thing about the rosters. The rosters are so crazy because you could have an injury at wide receiver, then all of a sudden they bring in a linebacker. He's like, what sense does that make? It depends on what they want to do. Special teams has a huge factor into that, especially if it's not a starter. If it's not a starter, well, even if it's a starter, it could be a starter because they'll elevate one of these guys. Maybe they have an extra wide receiver in that room that they got playing special teams, and they want to do more at linebacker for possibly special teams or possibly just to shore up the linebacker position. So it's so crazy when stuff happens in the league because it's like I said, somebody will go down on offense. All of a sudden, they bring in somebody from defense. It's like, how does that make sense? But that's the thing, guys. Sometimes the NFL don't make no sense.
Well, and strategy's involved, to your point, because it may be the opponent
that they're facing this coming week.
And they need an additional linebacker for that game, and they can afford to sacrifice a wide receiver. I remember, actually, this was probably your year when you were on the team. Leon Hall, right?
Yes,
he was
Leon
a teammate
Hall.
of yours, from the Bengals. And correct me if I'm wrong, there were games I remember where he was a healthy scratch. Mm-hmm. And Leon Hall was a solid player that year for you guys, but he didn't play special teams.
Right.
And the weeks where they needed...
He was on year 11 or something like that.
Yeah, he was a seasoned veteran pro, but they would call up somebody that had a little bit more experience on special teams. So in that 2016 season, sometimes late in the year, you'd be like, well, why is Leon Hall not playing? A healthy scratch. It wasn't necessarily bad play. It was just he's not a special teams contributor.
Yep, that's so funny, too. And now I'm thinking about my rookie year when Chase Daniels was the backup. So he was a backup to Drew Brees, who was the backup. Who was the backup to Mark Brunell, who was the backup to Drew Brees.
Third stringer, yeah.
And Chase Daniels, he'll be like on the team and not on the team, like week to week. It was crazy. Now we know Chase Daniels as the all-time backup in the NFL, but he was on that third quarterback, on and off the roster, any given week type of deal, and then you stick to it, man.
Hey.
You stick to it. You believe in what you can do, on the field, and this goes out to all the young football players out there. Look, being on a practice squad or that active, inactive roster spot. Man, all we ever wanted as young kids playing football was an opportunity to play in the NFL. That's all we wanted. If you stick to it, man, and believe in yourself and believe in what you do, stuff will happen. You got to have some things happen in your favor, a little luck be on your side with injuries and stuff like that. But, I look at Chase Daniels, man, and he was a third-string quarterback, early, and he was a really good college quarterback when he was at Missouri. Really good college quarterback. Sure. Heisman candidate, if I'm not mistaken. And all of a sudden, he's on the bench. Not even on the team some weeks, He stuck to it. Now he's probably the highest paid backup of all time in NFL history, and that's a safe position being a backup quarterback in the NFL. That's a really good position to be at.
It's a nice luxury. Well, Chase Daniel, he's now with the Chargers, of course, backing up Justin Herbert. But just to give you an idea, and remember that one year where the Eagles threw a lot of money
they signed him
on
for
his
like
plate?
20 mil, right?
2016.
Like
so he's been with 09, undrafted out of Missouri. He's been with Washington, the Saints, the Chiefs, the Eagles, the Saints again, the Bears, the Lions, and then he joined the Chargers in 2021. So he's been with them the last 2 years. And you have me interested in terms of that contract.
Trying to find it.
I'm bringing up his bio. I never thought we'd get to the Chase Daniel bio on a Giant
That's my
show.
guy. I saw him out in L.A. a few, maybe 2 years ago. I saw him. And I was like, hey, man, what's going on? How you doing? He was like, man, trying to figure out a way to steal some more money. I thought that was so great. Because it's at the end of the day, bro, you got to be happy where you're at. You know what I mean? You got to be happy where you're at. Because at the end of the day, Chase Daniels is a good quarterback. First of all, if you're in the NFL, you're a good player. Possibly a great player. You're good. Chase Daniels is good. He was great in college. He's a good backup in the league. And I've never seen him get in the game and be terrible. He's always, kind of did what he needed to do to survive in the game. He's not been a starter too many times in his career. I don't know how many games has he started, but I'm pretty sure I count it on one hand.
Yeah, it's not.
And
he's
in my year, so he's in year 14, if I'm not mistaken, going into this next year. So he's been in the league for a long time. But hey, I told Davis Webb, hey,
5 starts.
5 starts.
Out of 74 games. Yeah, so you just need one hand.
And I told Davis Webb too, man, if you can get into that top 64 of quarterbacks in the world, maybe not top 32 because that's the starters. If you can get to that top 64 and you could be one of the 33 to 64, oh, man, that is a great job to have in this world.
Absolutely.
There's nothing. You have no responsibility besides to go out to practice. You have, they can't blame you for anything. You could throw picks to your defense on scout team, make them feel good. It's a great job to have. No, your risk of injury is very, very, very low because you're not getting touched, and the quarterbacks don't get touched in practice. Not in practice. Quarterbacks only get hit in games.
Those red jerseys.
Yeah, they only get hit in games. And the second string, he might get pulled on a little bit by a starting DN, but all the coaches be like, hey, guys, stay away from the quarterback. They protect the quarterback. Let me tell you something. My daughter, I told her, she wanted to play football. I said, the only position that you can play is quarterback. Because that's the only position that they really protect. You know what I'm saying? And she got a little bit of arm, too, though.
Well, there you go. See? So you appease all different facets of the game. 3-year, $21 million deal with the Eagles in 2016. A little bit of a bold prediction. How about Chase Daniel reunites with Sean Payton to back up Russell Wilson in Denver? He could extend his career.
Definitely.
Right? He knows that offense.
Definitely.
Possible.
And he's a guy, like I said, he's a pro's pro. He understands kind of where he fits at in the league, and if he gets asked to start, he'll do it. If he asked to be a backup, he'll do it. And at this point, he don't need no more money. He's fine.
Oh, something tells me he's okay. But I don't know. If you talk to him again tomorrow,
I'll ask him.
He may tell you.
Talk to Sean? What's up, man?
Hey, I'd get on the phone right now and talk to Sean. If he wants, let him know. I will be more than happy to represent him. Okay, I will start and ignite those negotiations.
That, a little change.
Yes, sure. I'll be looking out for Chase. Don't worry. Be more than happy to assist. 201-939-4513 is the telephone number. Lance Medow, Jonathan Casillas with you here. Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Few reminders before we open up the phone lines. Make sure you go subscribe to the Giants Huddle podcast. We'll have interviews all offseason on various different topics. Giants fans, take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit Giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And the Giants official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV, brings original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. All right, let's open up the lines. 201-939-4513. Cliff is in New York. He gets us going here on Thursday's edition of BBKL. What's happening, Cliff?
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for the rundown. I hope it's just me that had internet trouble in the early part of the broadcast. I hope everything's fine on your end.
Yeah, we've been here alive and well and talking. So
yeah, you sound great.
Yeah,
Cliff.
and you sound clear.
You were going in and out on my little computer, which is more likely me than you.
Oh, you
anyway,
got to pay that internet
Yes,
bill,
am.
Cliff. Got to stay on top of those internet bills.
Well, anyway, I got a couple of things. First, I'm still stuck on Joe Schoen's press conference 2 days after the lousy defeat that ended the season, and the intensity that he had about the gap in the division, might have had a lot to do with just being less than 48 hours out from that bad defeat. But I'm bracing myself for major changes. I don't think he's going to. I don't think I should expect. I feel great about my team and the year that we had, and I don't expect him to think that he's got that the team has any laurels that it can rest on with the gap that exists in the trenches in particular, and that I'm wondering if that means that he might even put into play in his assets, not just having draft picks, but having guys on rookie year contracts that he might find appealing trade partners with to get more draft assets. That's my first question, if you know what I mean.
Well, when you say that, you're talking about players on other teams on current rookie contracts, if I understand you correctly, and trading picks for those players?
I'm talking about ours first. I'm talking about ours first as being in play.
Meaning to ship them out of town, you're talking about.
Yes.
Like Kadarius Toney type of situation.
Yeah, that would be a good example.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yes, and yeah.
I mean, it depends.
I just think that might be in play.
Well, I think, Cliff, it goes back to, remember, Joe Schoen, if he's not tied to the player, for example, he wasn't tied to Kadarius Toney, he didn't draft him. It's possible, maybe he says, okay, there's value here, but I don't know if he's a building block for us, and you look to move him. And remember, he's not tied to a bulk of the roster
Yeah, it's
yet.
like 70% of the roster that he's not tied to.
So, therefore, there may be a little bit more leeway and flexibility compared to an executive who's more invested, Jonathan, in a lot of the players that they drafted over the course of a few years.
Yeah, and then I also think that he got a lot of younger guys playing last year, so he kind of know what they got. So, look, I'm not saying that, Cliff, you're shooting for stars, but that could happen. I think it happened this year when everybody thought the Giants were going to bring in a wide receiver. I know that we brought in Isaiah Hodgins, but everybody thought it was going to be some type of free agency, big signing right before the free agency hit, and the only thing the Giants did was, get rid of basically Kadarius Toney and gain some some draft capital. And that's always a good thing to do too. So that's definitely up in the air. I think Joe Schoen is going to do whatever he can do, anything that he sees fit to go ahead and make this team a better team and catch our roster up to the guys down 95 in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I really think he's going to not be shy about the guys that he's already got, even if he likes them, even if he thinks they could be pieces to build from, if he can get something for them. Two players in effect, a player and a pick, or two picks, high picks, something like that. I could see that in terms of what I get from him, his sense of how far we still have to go, even though we had a really nice season.
Cliff,
and a nice
also
record.
Keep in mind, he does have 11 picks he could potentially have depending on the compensatory pick. So it's not as if he doesn't have a lot at his disposal this offseason. See, I think the mindset that you're talking about is if they came in, they only had 6 picks. I could see Joe Schoen wanting to do everything in his power to add more picks. They're not in that position. So I don't know if the urgency is, hey, let me get rid of a player to bring in a pick, especially since, in fairness, I don't see anybody on this roster other than if you're going to trade away some of your premier guys that you're going to get like a first or a second round pick.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, I mean, if we're talking about a fourth or a fifth rounder, Jonathan, is it really worth parting ways with
Giants
somebody?
have a couple picks back there on the back half of the draft. So, yeah, I don't really see too much of that stuff happening. But, look, like I said earlier, the Giants do a tremendous job, I feel like, which I don't think this is, universal throughout the league. They do a good job of developing players, and once you have a guy here and they're comfortable here, when I say comfortable, like they're here, they're at home, their family's here, you know what I'm saying? Like, they want to stay here. They want to play for this team, and the Giants have a winning organization now. They're back in the winning column, so that's something that I feel like is very, attractive to free agents, and the Giants can go ahead and figure out a guy who might be tied into a contract, maybe on that rookie deal like you're talking about, Cliff, and then go ahead and try to maybe give one of those draft picks away or two of those draft picks away for a premier free agent or premier guy in the league right now that maybe is unhappy in this situation.
What else do you have?
More like more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
We're listening.
Are you? I'm thinking not so much trading for more picks. I know he's got a good number already. I'm thinking more guys like Hodgins. Wasn't Hodgins under a rookie contract with Buffalo?
Yeah, but
still?
Hodgins was waived though. See, I think that's more
He was
practical.
waived.
Yeah, Hodgins.
Oh,
they didn't,
bad example because
they
he
didn't
was
trade.
waived.
Correct.
Forget that. Well, forget that example. But Joe Schoen went out and found guys on other teams' rosters that he was familiar with and brought them in, and some of them were young guys. And whether they were free agents or not, I would see him maybe considering giving up somebody that he likes because he, to get to build up more positions where he really needs the most help, which I think is both lines, so that he would consider even somebody like X, because if he could really get a young player for the defensive line or the offensive line rotation, that's really has a chance to be a premier player. I would see him considering something like that.
Which X we talking about? We're talking about Xavier
McKinney.
Oh,
yeah.
No. Oh no.
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 Too much of a foundation there.
Yeah, I don't. What you think, Lance? I don't.
Yeah,
think so.
I don't see them trying to move him.
Trying to get him. He's too good.
Correct. Yeah. Remember, here's the problem with the Giants in previous years. They couldn't find guys like McKinney in the draft.
Yeah.
So when you get a player like McKinney, and Cliff, we'll let you go on that note. Appreciate the phone call. You don't want to then all of a sudden part ways because, Jonathan, now you're going back to square one.
You got to find a guy like that.
Yeah, it took you long enough to find him.
It's not easy
now
to find
you
a guy
want
like
to
that.
part ways with him? I don't love that thinking.
He's the best DB that the Giants have on the roster right now, even with the hand. Of course, his hand's going to be fine next year.
Sure.
But he's a tremendous player. He can go sideline to sideline from the middle of the field. That's very difficult to do. That's a lot of yards. It's 53 and a half yards from sideline to sideline, and he can do that. He can do that on a consistent basis, And I feel like he's very smart. He's a leader, and he's a captain of the team, And I don't think this team is going to get rid of captains like Gettleman did. Gettleman got rid of captains, a lot of captains.
Well, and also they're trying to go in the direction of, and this is where I slightly disagree with the last caller, the problem with the Giants has been they drafted players and then how many first-round picks, while even you were here, got second contracts, right, Jonathan? That was the biggest issue. So now you're getting to the point where the Dexter Lawrences of the world, the Daniel Joneses of the world, the Xavier McKinneys, they're warranting second contract. That's what you want to build.
Yes.
That's how you want to put this roster together. You don't want to do the opposite.
Yeah.
You don't want to develop them, right? You just talked about the development. Develop them for somebody else?
Right.
To reap the rewards, right? We'll borrow them for 3 or 4 years. They good. You have them
Somebody
when they hit their
else take
prime.
them at their prime, right?
Yeah, I
No
don't
way.
think that's a practical game plan.
Yeah, not that X. Maybe the other X,
Shane Zimenez. we're talking about. But yeah,
And I like him a lot too. But he's not on. I feel like he's not on the top 11 when you talk about defensively. I don't think he's on that top 11. He's on that, special teams guy. Third or fourth linebacker, kind of rotating in. But Xavier McKinney's a stalwart on this team. He's a stalwart. He's one of the better safeties in the NFL. When he's fully healthy, he's going to have a lot of tackles and a lot of interceptions. And I think that's going to be this year when he has a healthy season.
And the caller was bringing up the fact that the Buffalo Bills, they have some familiarity, obviously, with the Giants and Joe Schoen and Brian Dable, and that's why Shane was bringing in some of those guys. But if you look at, Jonathan, the players that have a connection to Buffalo, all of them were waivers and free agents. They didn't trade for anybody. Like Nick McLeod, for example.
Tyrod Taylor, too.
Taylor, John Feliciano came over as a free agent. I know we're mentioning some polished veterans. These are not all young guys, but there's really no example where Joe Schoen said, I'm going to give up assets to bring in somebody who I had familiarity with. Now, is it possible with more picks under his belt, he feels he can make a move? I wouldn't rule that out, but I think they're very good at identifying low-risk, high-reward type of deals with players that they may have some history with.
Yeah, and like I said, they did a great job at that this year. I think Joe Schoen did a tremendous job at bringing in guys, not only before the season, but in the middle of the season. Isaiah Hodgins got brought in November? Is that November when he got brought in?
Yeah, maybe late October. It was
late
right
October,
around
but it wasn't,
after the bye.
It wasn't the beginning of the season.
No,
it was
not
right
at
in the
all.
middle of the
No,
season, right in the thick of it. And he came in and he played very, very well, surprisingly. And, I think a couple guys like that here and there, and that's why I think I talked about it last week with Lance about Joe Schoen's job. Like, he has, I think, the hardest job. Out of everybody in this organization, he has the hardest job. He works the most, probably, out of anybody. He has to pay attention to everything, not only players, but coaches, staff. Like, you got to pay attention to so many different things. He's looking at college guys. He's looking at guys on other teams. He literally has to know every single person in the league to see if anybody's available, because at the end of the day, you want to do the best for your organization, and that means getting in the guys that you feel like can help you, and that's all over throughout the league. There's 31 other teams in the NFL, and I'm pretty sure Joe Schoen knows every single player on the team, on the league.
Because to your point, guys are waived left and right, and you want to have some knowledge.
Idea of who they are,
what's going on.
Because they fast, too. It goes quick. Somebody hits the streets, somebody else has their eye on them and actually knows them and have a previous relationship with this guy. All of a sudden, they're calling. But if you know the guy, you be like, hey, this is a valuable guy. He might have been on the list, might have not been on the list, but I know this guy. He can help us. And you bring him in. Joe Schoen said he's going to have one day off in February. One day off.
Well, at least until the draft comes. Yeah, he's not going to get much breathing room. Because for him, right, especially with the team going to the playoffs, you were thinking about the roster all the way up through mid-January.
Yep.
Then it ends, and now the Senior Bowl is here this week.
Right.
And then the Combine.
Quick.
And then you're going to get your board in order and the draft. So, yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that he's only taking a day off.
Yeah, I'm good on being a GM. Don't ask me. Not that I'm asked, but don't ask me.
Yes. No. You're fine in the broadcasting
I'm fine.
aspect now. Yes, you've made the nice transition. All right, let's head back to the lines. Randy is in California joining us here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. What's happening, Randy? Randy going one?
Hello?
Yes, Randy, what's happening?
Hello?
Yes.
No, this is Mike from Virginia.
It's Mike,
But,
okay.
What's up, Mike?
What's happening, Mike?
No problem. What's up, fellas? Real quick, everybody knows the situation we have with our receivers, with the injuries that we had with Shep, Robinson, and Colin Johnson. Everybody was, y'all saw what was going on. I did not. I live in VA, but situation with Colin Johnson where he was somebody that everybody was raving about. So my question is, with those three guys being healthy, do you think that would have changed the offense in a significant way? And if not, who is, out of all of our receivers, probably the odd man out? And I appreciate y'all taking my call.
Well, just so we're on the same page, which three are we talking about? You mentioned Colin Johnson, who was hurt right before the season.
Wandale Robinson.
Robinson.
And Isaiah Hodgins.
So those three we're talking about? So you're asking.
But as a whole, just
as a collective
whole,
unit.
We have Slayton. We know what Slayton can do. Hodgins, we saw what Hodgins can do. Richie James. So just all of our receivers. Now we add the other three that were injured, right? Now, who's basically the odd man out? And do we possibly have a true number one on the team that may have been injured? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sure. No, I get what you're saying, and we'll let you go on that note, Mike. Appreciate the phone call.
I don't think the Giants have a number one receiver on this roster. I don't think so. And even Sterling, maybe Sterling in his prime was possibly a number one, possibly, but he was really a number two, especially to Odell, right? And then you look at, who played this year for the Giants, and I like Slayton. I felt like he wasn't consistent this year. I feel like the guy that we thought he was, as in the guy that can go up and win those 50-50 balls, I don't feel like it was 50-50 with him. I think he was on the lower end side of that 50-50 number. And if I got to look at anybody, and I hate doing this, but he asked the question, I think Slayton might be the guy that played this year that might be the odd man out because he only had a 1-year deal, right?
Yeah, well, and also took a pay cut at the beginning of the season as a result. But remember, Colin Johnson's still a question mark. I mean, we haven't seen him on the field in quite some time.
That's why I said the guys that played this year. Because I can't talk about Wan'Dale Robinson and none of the guys that didn't play.
Yeah.
I could talk about Isaiah Hodgins because I don't watch guys in college too much. You know what I mean? I don't watch college football. So I have no idea what the kid's capable of doing. Not one bit. So I can't really talk about, that's why I said the guys that played this year. And I think we all know Kenny Golladay is probably going to be out too. Given the number that he's going to hit the Giants with. I don't know how that's going to work with them getting rid of that number, because he's under contract.
Sure.
So I don't know how that's going to work, but I don't see him
depends on how much
getting paid
money.
$18 million he's due in 2023. I don't see that happening this year. So I think Slayton and then Kenny Golladay.
Well, and Slayton is a free agent, so you don't even really have to make a decision from that standpoint. You don't have to worry about financials. I think if the question is who's in the game plan moving forward, I think it's safe to say that Isaiah Hodgins has solidified a spot.
Yep.
And as an exclusive restricted free agent, the chances of them losing him are very slim. And Wan'Dale Robinson, because you drafted him, he showed some nice flashes before he got hurt. I think those two guys probably feel good about their outlook. As far as anybody else currently on the roster, I wouldn't pen anyone in. Jonathan, I think there's
in the receiver room.
Yeah. If we're looking ahead at 2023, I would not pen in anybody else. I think there's room for a few guys to be drafted and come in. To your point, maybe they bring in a free agent if they part ways with somebody on the roster, and then a Colin Johnson, a Richie James, a Darius Slayton, if they feel like the money's right, and they bring one of them back to compete for a 6th spot or something like that, depending on how many receivers. Sure, I could see that, but I would say Wan'Dale Robinson and Isaiah Hodgins. Those are the two guys that should feel good about their position on this roster.
Yeah, and I feel like the Giants have enough draft capital that they can upgrade basically every position. Not only draft capital to draft, but also do some damage in free agency. Maybe grab one of those guys. I think I mentioned T. Higgins last time. I know we can't talk about it too much.
Well, Higgins, but the thing is, T. Higgins is not a free agent, though.
I know, but remember, A.J. Brown wasn't either.
Sure, so
and Tyreek Hill wasn't either.
So
that's what I'm saying.
It would have to be a trade.
Yeah, a trade. I said free agency, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But something like that where you see a guy who knows that he's not going to get paid up in Cincinnati.
Well, you're talking about with all the wide receivers?
Yeah, with Jamar Chase, and they got to do Burrow soon. You know what I'm saying? They Burrow, right? Yeah.
Burrow will eventually.
But that's what I'm saying. Somebody like that who may not be at the top of anybody's mind. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden, Joe Schoen does his magic and gets a guy like that. Because I think when we talked about this before. My thought process for the Giants' priorities is, number one, you have to get Daniel Jones squared away, right? That's number one. Number two, you have to get that wide receiver. The way the NFL is right now, you got to have a number one target to go to in the passing game. The Kansas City Chiefs have the tight end to do that, who runs routes better than probably most of the receivers in the NFL. And he had 14 catches not too long ago in a playoff game. He's the guy who scored 4 touchdowns this year in one game. That's the type of person they got. We don't have anybody like that. We don't have anybody like that on the roster in any position. Saquon's close to that, but he plays running back. He doesn't play wide receiver, even though he probably could play wide receiver, right? The Giants need that guy. And I think you do that, and I feel like priority-wise, that's even higher than signing Saquon. And then after that, for me, it's depth. You need quality players all throughout the roster. Like if you look at the Eagles, they have Pro Bowl players at a lot of positions, and they have a really good backup to back them up. And on the defensive line, they basically got 7 Pro Bowlers on the defensive line. And how do you compete with that? You got to add depth because injuries will happen. It's not if they happen. They're going to happen. Your star players will get hurt. That's just what happens in the NFL. You got to have quality guys coming in that back them up. You got to. And that's depth.
Yeah. Well, the Eagles, though, they developed those guys through the draft, though.
Yes.
That's how they got that.
But they got a couple free agents, too. Hassan Reddick, and they got bought in.
True. Reddick was the free agent, but Linval Joseph, Sue. But those are guys sort of on the back end of their career.
But they had great years this year.
No, absolutely.
But I agree with you with the draft. They did great in draft.
Correct.
Yeah,
so that's why I think if you're the Giants, and I'm with you in terms of getting that elite playmaker in the passing attack, but I think you can get a number 1 wide receiver in the draft.
I think so too.
I don't think that's a
yes,
stretch.
I think so too.
So I don't think you have to go out, because here's the thing about the T. Higgins situation. If we use that as a hypothetical, not only do you have to acquire a player like that,
Got to
John,
give up some stuff.
you then have to give him a new contract.
Right.
So like A.J. Brown.
Big contract.
Well, yeah, your eyes are lighting up
Yeah,
as a former
for sure.
player. No, but with the A.J. Brown situation, and listen, every GM knows how to work their magic, but they gave up picks, and then they had to give him a deal.
Big deal.
So, that's a lot
It
for
is.
one player, regardless of what that player gives you. So I think if you can circumvent that, navigate that going through the draft, that's what I would look for, especially where the Giants are in terms of managing their cap.
Yeah.
See, the Eagles are in a different position.
Oh, 100%.
Than where the Giants
Yeah,
were
100%.
when they made that deal.
Yeah,
So
100%. I agree. And then if you look at 5 years ago when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl, like they were good 5 years ago. They were a Super Bowl winning team 5 years ago. So you look at the history of the Giants over the last 10 years, only one winning season.
Yep.
Only one. So that has a lot to do with, draft and stuff like that.
approach, strategy.
And then also
Yeah.
the guys that you keep, you know what I mean? And then, to say that the Eagles are better than the Giants is not, I'm not lying when I say that. I'm not making stuff up. They have been superior to the Giants for a decade. For a decade. The Giants have not won in Philly in a very, very long time. And they barely win when the Philadelphia Eagles play here. You don't have to look outside of the division to see where the Giants need to get to. You look right at the Philadelphia Eagles. It's an hour and a half away down to 95, down the Turnpike. Nobody likes going over there. But look, that's a good place to look at to see where the Giants need to get at. Because if we can't get out the division, you can't do anything. And Giants were lucky this year that other divisions were bad.
Yeah, it was a down year for the NFC South specifically.
They had, what was the Bucks, 8-9?
8-9, yeah, sub
They had
500.
a sub-500 record. It's not going to happen too many years, guys.
Well, even the NFC West, I would argue, right? A down year too.
100%.
Look at the Rams. They fell off a cliff. The Cardinals.
So many teams who they were projected to be over 500 were under 500, and the Giants were projected to be under 500. They were over 500. They had a luxury of playing the AFC South and other divisions, that maybe they weren't as strong, but it's not going to be like that year in and year out.
That's a great point.
And the Giants need to compete in a division. Last year they went 1-4-1 in the division.
And
that
1-5-1 if you
horrible.
enter the playoffs.
Right, into the playoffs.
Yeah.
That is horrible. That is not good. The Giants can't do that again. The Giants had a great year this year. There was a little bit of luck involved, a little bit of circumstance involved this year. Of course, injuries didn't help them out, but they got guys healthy at the end of the year that played very well for them. Xavier McKinney came back. Adoree Jackson came back at the end of the year. But, at the end of the day, you got to be competitive in your division. That is number one. When they talk about team goals, it's always win your division. It's always number one. It's always number one in every single locker room. It's win your division because that gets you the ticket to the dance. That gets you the ticket to the dance. When you win your division, you get a ticket to the dance. And if the Giants can't win a division, you cannot guarantee a playoff spot. That's just facts.
Well, you'll just be practicing your dance moves from the side. That's essentially, to use your analogy,
Yeah.
that's essentially what will be happening. Yeah, you control your own destiny if you win the division, and you don't have to worry about assistance, and that's why that's key, and that's been a challenge for the Giants even outside of this season. But now between the Eagles and the Cowboys, it's no picnic. And Washington, I wouldn't sleep on
They're
either.
tough
They
too.
played two
Yep.
highly contested
They get a
games with
quarterback
those two
over
teams.
in Washington. They'll be scared because they have the wide receivers on the outside. They love to run the football no matter what time of the game it is. And they have two stalwart D tackles. And they got some young guys along the defensive line. But they got the good building blocks over there, which I feel like the Giants need to kind of catch up to them in terms of building blocks.
Sure.
They just kind of, let it go down their leg at the end of the season. But it was a time in the season where they won 6 out of 7 games, the Commanders. Don't sleep on them. We don't talk about them a lot. We talk about the guys down 95. We talk about the guys in Texas. We don't talk about the guys in D.C. too much, but they're very strong too. This was the NFC Beast, right, they call it?
Sure.
NFC Beast for a reason. These teams were good this year, comparatively so too, when you look at the other division. Because Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they weren't as good as any team in the NFC East. That's what I think.
No, I'm completely with you. Well, we almost had 4 teams in one division
Right.
make the playoffs, so I think that tells it all. 201-939-4513 is the telephone number. Let's head back to the lines. Len is in Maryland. He joins us. What's happening, Len?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
You're right.
Len?
What's on your mind?
Good. Quick point to Jonathan. A couple of weeks ago, Jonathan, you said you were doing a charity event with Jay Alford.
Mm-hmm.
Man, one of the all-time great sacks in Giants history on Brady in that Super Bowl from Jay Alford. if you see Jay, I'm glad he's around, and I'm glad he's involved with some things that the Giants are doing. If you see Jay, Jonathan, tell him the fans won't forget that sack ever.
I will definitely do that. Jay actually does. He's like an equipment checker. Like he's up in the stadium at all games. I see him at all the home games, and he's checking equipment to make sure guys are like compliant.
Good
so
for
he's
him.
He's over there making sure guys. He's
Good
like
for him.
checking guys like, hey, pull your socks up, pull your socks down. You got to pull your, cover your kneecaps up. He's preventing guys from getting fined.
Good for him.
Because I went up to him and I grabbed him. I said, bro, you over here messing with guys? You finding guys? He said, no, I'm the one helping them out.
Man,
so Jay's still helping the Giants out, believe it or not.
Yeah, Lance would probably remember this better than I do, but I don't know if that was the next to the last play, Lance. Before the long pass down the sidelines. But man, that was a big time sack. Thank him for that. Tell him we won't forget.
Definitely will.
Lance will be surprised at this. I really don't have too much to say. Well,
it was good talking with you, Lance. We'll let you go on that note.
I'm processing the suddenness of the end of the season. I mean, a playoff loss. 24 hours later. It's not next week. It's 7 months down the road to the next game. It just did not end on a good note. I'm frustrated by that. I thought we'd do a little better in that game. But hey, listen, I'm optimistic, and you guys have been talking that way today. I think we're at a point now. This is the best, core of players, 8 to 10 players. I think we've had in really in the last 7 or 8 years. And I think the team is at a point now, and we're out of the doldrums of being one of those teams where you start thinking about you got to get worse before you can get better. You got to break it all down. We're not there.
Len, can I ask you one question, Len, real quick?
Yeah.
Now, the other team that made it to the championship weekend in the NFC was the San Francisco 49ers, right?
Right.
Do you think they're tremendously talented and they have basically a really good roster?
Yes, I do, yeah.
My question is to you, who would you rather be, New York Giants or the San Francisco 49ers right now, today?
Well, I'll take that roster.
Yeah, but the quarterback. Who's going to play quarterback for you?
Yeah, well, there you go.
So you see what I'm saying? So it's like there's negatives and positives, because, yes, they can say they had a great season because they made it to the championship round, and they probably lost to, I think, the Super Bowl champion. I think the Philadelphia Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl. That's what I think.
Yeah,
I know you guys don't like that, but I'm a realist, and they're just so talented, and Jalen Hurts is playing lights out. So they're going they lost to the Super Bowl champion team, which is not bad to look upon, but they also lost 4 quarterbacks.
Oh, yeah.
They got 4 quarterbacks hurt this year.
Yeah.
Their starter, their old starter, their new guy who was 7-0.
Oh, my God.
And then he gets knocked out. He has a really serious elbow injury to the throwing arm.
Hard to imagine.
And then Josh Johnson, who played on 28 teams, he got knocked out the game too.
Yeah.
Like, who would you rather be?
Actually, it's 29, not 28. But yeah,
who would you rather be? I would rather be the New York Giants.
Well, but Shanahan's won with all of those guys.
This is
too.
true.
You got to give him credit, Jonathan. So
insert quarterback here.
I mean, the guy, he's found the magic potion. So you got to give him credit from that standpoint.
Hey, just one final quick point. Getting back to the Giants. We got a front office with a plan. We got a coaching staff that seems to be able to develop players and come up with a pathway to victory from week to week. Given the way Dable handled everything, a solid core of players. Those 8 to 10 guys. Hey, the window is opening. The window of opportunity is there. I feel really good, coming out of this season, going into next season. I think it could. I know Lance doesn't like this. I know it's a year-to-year league, Lance, but let me get away with this one today. I think the next 3 to 4 years could be really nice for the New York Football Giants.
All right,
I'm going to leave it at that for today. Hey, you guys are doing a great job. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Len.
Appreciate the phone call. Well, my point is always, and you know this, we're playing the game for so long, you've seen teams, right, they win 4 in a row to end one season, and the following season, everything's different because the roster turned over. Yeah, the foundational pieces are there. I don't think there's any doubt about it, but it goes back to some of the things you and I talked about over the course of the show. You have to continue to develop some of the recent draft classes. Daniel Jones, assuming he's back, needs to continue to take his game to a new level. And you also want to see them not necessarily walk that fine line of having to win by the chinny chin chin every single week because that law of average tends to balance out.
Right.
It's not to say that you should go out and win by 20 points. That's unrealistic too.
Right.
But if you're going to walk that tightrope
every game, 17 weeks in a row,
it's tough. It is very tough to walk that line.
Yeah, for sure. And look, Len said 8 to 10 players that they have the core unit.
That's what he had given in terms of his ballpark number.
The Eagles have double that.
Yeah.
That's Len. That's where we're facing right now. The Eagles have double that. You know, Boston Scott, who is they call the giant killer, he's not even in that number. He's not even in that number. He's not in that top 20 on the Eagles roster. And he comes in and he beats the Giants. Like, that's how talented the Philadelphia Eagles is. That is the benchmark that the Giants have to get to. That is the standard. I don't know if they can possibly get there. I think the culture here is very much established. I think the coaching here is probably better than most teams around the NFL, but you have to catch up in talent. You have to, or you won't be competitive.
Well, I think, once again, that is worth noting before we wrap up. If the Eagles are more in that 16 to 20 ballpark, that's where you want to get. If you want to talk about a core, do the math. You have 53 players on the roster. You want to be knocking on the door about 25. I mean, that may be a stretch, but if about half your roster, then you could say we truly have a core.
Yes.
8 to 10 is nice, but what happens if you lose 3 or 4 of those 8 to 10?
Right.
By the time you get to week 5 or week 6. Exactly.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, 8 to 10 is not a very big volume. Correct. So
and you have 22
you
guys on the field at one time. 11 on one side and 11 on the other side. That's not a good number right there. That means 1, 2, or 3 guys. Your core guys are only playing at one time, either offense, defense, or special team, which is not good.
Numbers in the NFL fluctuate, and I think the Giants learned that the hard way this season due to the injury bug. All right, that is going to wrap up Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. A reminder, today's episode, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcast. We're going to be up and running again on Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, so stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest. For Jonathan Casillas, I'm Lance Medow. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we'll speak to you on Friday right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Have a good one.